Viewers, subscribers, new channel finders, welcome back to TECHNOBABBLE. In today's video, which is going to be a long one, so buckle up, I'm going to be taking apart and cleaning out my childhood Nintendo 64. I had to order some special screwdrivers for that, and since I've kind of gotten a habit of recording basically everything that I order and unbox or whatever, I figured I'd throw that in here too. Got a set of some game bit screwdrivers, a 3.8 and a 4, I think. Anyway, got those. Got the Nintendo 64. I don't think this thing has ever been opened in its 20-something years of existence, so should be pretty exciting. Let's get into it. It does not have the special expansion pack, or whatever it's called, jumper booster pack or whatever. Never had one of those, never had a game that required it, although I had probably had some that would have probably benefited from it. From the outside I can see a little bit of dust and stuff, and there's the special screws that prohibit me from getting inside of it. I tend to rub my fingernail or whatever over the stickers. It's just a habit from like warranty stickers nowadays. They put them over top of screws and make it a pain to get into. Get the screws out and just pull it apart. Probably would be better to pull out the jumper pack first, but I did it this way. It's worked out fine. So the hard part's keeping up with where the screws go on the inside. It's really not bad inside this as far as like 20 something years of dust goes. And it is definitely dusty, but it's not terrible. But there's also not a fan inside the Nintendo 64 to drag dust inside of it. I say I had the Nintendo 64 as a kid, which I sort of did, but not like you might think. The Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 are the first consoles that I've ever had at launch, and I got the PlayStation 5 like a year after, but everyone knows why that is. The power and reset buttons have little sort of plastic retention that holds them in. You just pinch it together and push down and it will push those buttons out. But yeah, when I had the Nintendo 64, I think other people had like Xbox and GameCube and maybe even 360. Not entirely sure. I do know that I was in like middle school or something, which makes me sound old, but I'm not as old as you think. So if you were to be doing this and were using this video as a guide, which I would appreciate, that's kind of the hope and intention here, is to be able to show you how to take a Nintendo 64 apart. I'm sure there are other videos for that as well. But once you get to the shell part, you could actually wash that, which would be a good way to do it. And it would be more thorough than I was able to be, but I did not want to damage the stickers that were on the console. So I decided to go with wiping it out with paper towels and Q-tips, cotton buds, to get into the nooks and crannies of all the plastic. And that little piece I just took out there, the diffuser for the red LED on the front of the console, that is one of those little parts that you're going to want to remember to put back in. I say this from experience. I actually did not watch a guide before my teardown, so I made mistakes of my own, which is kind of how I like to do it. And I think it makes it easier to say, hey, these are the things to look out for because these are the things that I messed up. Getting down to the board and the heat sink, it's got a huge aluminum heat sink on it. Fairly sure it's aluminum just from the feel of it. I didn't actually look it up. Probably should have. Probably should have looked up some specs and stuff. It's got 64 bits because I think it was right after the Bit Wars, and that's about all I know about it. It says Nintendo on it, and it's got some thermal pads on the underside of this heat sink here. And if I would have known that I was going to be taking this console apart this far down, I would have ordered some new thermal pads to put on there. We've got some little fiddly bits here around where the jumper expansion pack slots in at the front. And all in all, it's in fairly good shape. There's a little bit of some gunk and stuff, what almost looked like a piece of grass on that chip on the left, which I should have looked up more information on. Maybe actually learn something about it. But I'm really just here to clean this thing out, not give a detailed history or breakdown of the Nintendo 64. I'm sure there are people that could do much better than I could as far as that goes. So thanks to the way that they've actually got the board encased in all this metal, like I was saying, the board is in fairly good shape. I do wind up cleaning it off with some canned air and some isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush, which I will go into a time lapse on because I don't think anyone wants to watch me scrub this thing for like 15 minutes. Just do my best to make sure to remove as much dust and everything as possible from it. It's more about preservation than repair. Just keeping it going and keeping it working. I know time lapse isn't exactly the most exciting form of content to watch, but I wanted to keep all the footage in just to be able to show everything that I did. Clean the actual heat sink with the thermal pads on it off with some alcohol and a paper towel as well. And the metal plate that goes on the back side, the underside of the motherboard. It was in really good condition considering that the top plate for some reason actually had a little bit of rust in one corner on it, as well as the little fiddly bits, as I called them, the little clips and stuff that went around the jumper pack. And all of those parts I cleaned with some alcohol at first and was going to call it good, and then decided that I'd rather actually try to remove as much of the rust as possible, so I took a Dremel with a brass brush to it. as you can see here. And some surface cleaner just to try to help loosen it up. I figured it was a good try. I would probably recommend trying it with WD-40 or more dedicated metal cleaner, or maybe drop it in a like rust remover solution or something. I do not have any of that stuff at the moment, so this was the best that I could come up with on short notice. Time lapse some of that as well. I do wind up making some cuts, actually, thinking back to editing the video. I like to do my voiceover after so I can watch the video back and try to make sure my voiceover is cohesive with what is actually going on in the video. It turns out that a Dremel with a brass brush is a really good way to rip a paper towel to shreds, so that made a pretty good mess. A good way to clean up that mess is to use a lint roller. I actually take a lint roller to my desk pad and desk very frequently. The screws that hold the heatsink to this other chunk of metal here, like the cover plate for the motherboard, they have, if you take it apart you'll see them, they have little locking washers, I believe they're called, and the nuts that goes on those screws have like grooves on the back. And I would say that this is probably the best way to try to get it back together, is to put the heatsink back on the motherboard shield before you put that back on the motherboard. Yeah, I actually was talking with my Valhalla's Demise patron. He does not, and I don't consider him to pay for TECHNOBABBLE content. But I was talking with him about Nintendo 64 stuff and everything, and came to realize that I had a lot more games on this system than I actually remembered. Because I only thought I ever had I never had an awful lot, just because they were hard to find at that time. The one game that I can remember buying in store for the Nintendo 64 around the time that I got it was Resident Evil 2, and it was in like a clearance bin at GameStop, and they were like they were not selling the games anymore, really. They wouldn't take them in or anything. They were just getting rid of what inventory they had, and that's how I managed to get my hands on Resident Evil 2. Unfortunately, now I've only got 3 games for the Nintendo 64. This is my childhood Nintendo 64, and I have 2 games left from that time. I have GoldenEye and Lego Racers. I think everybody knows GoldenEye, but I actually had quite a few more games that just never came up in my head. Like, my favorite console vault that I've ever had was probably the GameCube, and I feel like I had more games for that than I actually did, but don't now. So anyway, on to cleaning the actual plastic parts. I again used isopropyl alcohol to wipe them out as best that I could. Paper towels, toothbrush, rag, cotton buds, Q-tips, cotton swabs, whatever you want to call them. This is definitely going to be another part where I go into a pretty heavy time lapse, just because was a time consuming process. And then I want to use some Armor All, which actually says helps renew and revitalize vinyl, rubber, and plastic. And that's what I want to do. It's, you know, good for it. You use it in your car, use it on your plastic. This is definitely plastic. And it looks like something inappropriate. Some more time lapse, scrubbing and cleaning. I can say I think that the Nintendo 64 has some of the worst made controllers ever to be made. Like the pitchfork looking thing, just, it's awful. And the games control bad because of it. I mean, around the same time you had the PlayStation, and the controllers for the PlayStation are so much better than the Nintendo 64 controller. I could even see the argument for how a PlayStation controller is a better controller than a GameCube controller. Don't know that I would particularly agree. The C stick on the GameCube is a little weird though. Other than that, they're pretty daggone similar. So I actually made a cut here because this is where that I ran into my own personal mistakes. These little screws, the shorter screws, they're kind of copper brass looking, go on this above the little, as I called it, fiddly bit, the little kind of spring tensioner for the expansion pack. And I had thought that they went elsewhere around the motherboard, and it made for putting this thing back together to be quite tedious. I actually looked back at my own video because I wound up with the one extra screw that I couldn't figure out where it went. So I decided to leave this in and not in a time lapse so that you could easily see where everything goes. See, even here I had almost forgot that the AV port, audio video port on the back, has like a shroud that slides over from the back instead of just over from the top. Most consoles, they slide over from the top. So this one I actually had to lift up and push it down over it because I'd almost forgot to put that back in there. But again, that's what the hope is. I can make the mistakes and tell you that I made them, and so you don't have to. And hopefully after all this I can keep the Nintendo 64 going for another 20 some years, if not longer. These things were built like tanks. I've also heard people say that cartridge based games, like the cartridge itself, will pretty much never actually go bad. The batteries that are in some of the cartridge games that have batteries and the ones in the memory packs will go bad, but I can understand to some extent wanting to be able to keep on, hold on to your old saved games or whatever, but at the same time, if you were to lose your saved games because a battery died in a cartridge, in a memory pack, I mean, you can play the game again, but if you've got like saves from someone you lost or something, I can understand. There are ways to transfer the saves or back them up and stuff. I've never bothered with it myself, so I can't really help you with that one. But if you're fairly new and this is one of your first guides of looking up, like working on a console or whatever, just take it slow. I went into this not knowing what I was doing or anything, and made it through as far as cleaning it out. Any actual major repairs to the board or anything would have been something else. And if I ever have to, I will cover that. I'm not very experienced with soldering, but I do like tinkering with stuff. So as things break and need repairs and such, I will go through and do my very best to repair them, because I firmly believe that I can't break what is already broken. I mean, if it wouldn't be any good to me anyway, it does not hurt to take it apart to try to fix it. And we can put the screws, the game bit annoying screws that I had to order new screwdrivers for, back in the bottom of the console, and it's good to go. I kind of skipped over those because it's pretty straightforward where those screws go. And that's pretty much it. It's a nice, newly cleaned out, really old console. And I really do think the Armor All kind of brings the look of it back to life. And if you're not concerned about saving the stickers on it, given the actual plastic shell with all the metal parts and stuff stripped away from it, a bath is a great way to go. Like, wash it with some dish soap. It would be a much easier way to clean it. But that's it for this one. This has been Valhalla's Demise. This has been TECHNOBABBLE. I hope you enjoyed. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and all that nonsense. And I hope to catch you in the next one. Be safe, be good.